When I found that golden envelope in his mother's dresser, I thought it was a mistake. A card meant for someone else, maybe one of her distant cousins getting married in another city. But when the light caught the embossed letters, his name, crisp and proud beside a woman's I'd never heard before, I felt something sink deep inside me. It wasn't shock. Shock comes fast, loud. This was slower, heavier. Like grief, only quieter. At that moment, I heard his mother humming in the kitchen. Her voice cracked slightly on the high notes, the way old people's voices do when they sing without realizing anyone is listening. The smell of sambar and ghee drifted through the small house. Familiar, comforting. In another life, I might have smiled. Instead, I stood there, hands trembling around that gilded invitation, trying to make sense of the two names that didn't belong together. An hour before, I'd still believed he loved me. His name was Raghav. The boy who could never tie his shoelaces properly, who once carried my broken sandal in his hand because he didn't want me walking barefoot after a sudden rain. The man who told me, just a week ago, that he had to move abroad for work, Singapore, he'd said, promising me that our love could survive oceans and time zones. We cried at the airport, clinging to each other like it was the last hug on earth. He looked me straight in the eyes and said, "This isn't goodbye. It's just a pause, okay?" And like a fool, I believed him that golden card was not a pause. It was punctuation, yes, but an ending. Now, the thing about lies is that they don't arrive on their own. They travel with accomplices, half-truths, gestures, silence. Looking back, I should have noticed them. But when you love someone, you edit the world through hope. You explain away anything that doesn't fit. I didn't confront his mother right then. Instead, I put the card back exactly where I found it, beneath a stack of folded shawls smelling of rose perfume, and walked out of that house with a smile so tight, my gums ached. I told her I'd drop off the gifts another day, that I had a headache. She offered me lemon tea. I declined. I walked home. 5 blocks, each one longer than the last. The city around me moved as usual, vendors shouting prices, horns blaring, a child crying after an ice cream truck. Everything looked the same, and yet I was walking through a world that didn't belong to me anymore. At home, his jacket still hung on the back of my chair. I sat there for a long time, staring at it. The fabric smelled like him, coffee, rain, cinnamon. 1,000 small memories. When I finally leaned forward and pressed my face against it, I realized my tears didn't even surprise me. They came easy, natural, like they'd been waiting that night. I didn't sleep. Sometimes I think women like me are taught to cry quietly. To bear heartbreak without disturbing the peace around us. So I just sat on the floor, the fan whirring overhead, asking myself who the woman in that invitation was. Maybe a work friend. Maybe a family arrangement. Maybe she was sitting somewhere right then, trying on her wedding lehenga, not knowing that the man she was marrying had already made promises to someone else, and yet, a strange calm washed over me. Pain, yes, but also clarity. Lies unravel on their own if you give them enough time. I decided to attend his wedding. Not as a guest. Not even out of jealousy. But because I needed to see him one last time, not the version he showed me, the kind, funny man who promised forever, but the one who could look into my eyes and lie straight through his teeth. Before I tell you what happened next, maybe I should start from the beginning. Because stories like this don't bloom overnight. They grow slowly, like vines climbing up the walls of your life, until one day, you wake up and realize the house is covered in something unrecognizable. Raghav and I met during college orientation week. It wasn't cinematic, not one of those slow-motion encounters people write songs about. We were both running late to class, bumping into each other at the corridor turned so hard my phone flew out of my hand. He picked it up, apologized, and noticed my cracked screen with genuine guilt. "I'll fix it," he said. And he did. The next day he came back with a tiny plastic bag of screen protectors, 3 of them, because I know you'll break the next one too. That was Raghav. Gentle. Thoughtful. The kind of man who remembered your dog's birthday and sang in the car even though he couldn't hit a note. When we started dating, his mother didn't like me much. She smiled politely, always too polite. There was a stiffness, especially when she served me tea or asked about my family. My parents had passed away when I was young, and I grew up with my grandmother. Maybe she saw that as a flaw, a girl without a family tree that could be traced during marriage talks. Still, I tried. I brought sweets, helped her fold laundry, even listened when she told old family stories that looped back to the same phrase, "In our house, loyalty means everything." Irony has a cruel sense of humor. Over time, she softened, or pretended to. By the time Raghav told me about his posting abroad, she even hugged me. "He'll call you every day," she'd said, giving me a small packet of homemade muruku. "Take care of yourself, Beta." Her voice was syrupy warm. I didn't catch the tremor behind it. The night before his flight, we sat on my balcony, watching planes crawl across the dark sky. He rested his head in my lap, my fingers tracing small circles on his forehead. He said he was scared, new job, new country, new everything, but that I was his anchor. He even chuckled when I made him promise to send postcards instead of just texts. "You're old-fashioned," he teased. "That's why I love you." I wish he hadn't said that. Because that kind of love, the kind that feels like home, is what hurts the most to lose. After he left, I went back to my routines. Work, laundry, late-night tea. Loneliness became something I could measure in teaspoons, how many stirrings it took before the sugar dissolved. The first few days, I heard from him often. Morning calls, sleepy texts, a picture of his office window overlooking a skyline. He'd say, "I miss you," and I'd smile at the screen like a fool, whispering it back even though he couldn't hear me. Then the messages slowed down. At first I understood. Time difference. Busy work schedules. But soon, the calls turned shorter. Replies turned vague. "Sorry love, crazy meetings. Talk later?" It's strange how silence can start as a fragment and slowly grow into something that fills the entire room. One night, I waited for him to call. The clock hit midnight, then 1. I finally gave up and slipped under the covers, holding my phone like a heartbeat. The last thing I saw before sleep took over was our chat screen, blinking with nothing. That was the first clue I ignored. Raghav's mother called 2 days later. She asked if I could come by to drop off some canned goods. She was packing for relatives in Chennai. Her voice carried its usual warmth, the kind that sounds like sunlight through lace curtains. I said yes without thinking. Maybe deep down, I wanted someone to talk to. Maybe I just wanted to feel close to something that still belonged to him. Her house always smelled the same, jasmine oil and freshly mopped tiles. She greeted me with a soft smile, hugging me a second too long. "Such a good girl," she said. We sat at her dining table, chatting about nothing important. She told me Raghav had called her too, that he was adjusting well. "He's lucky to have you waiting for him," she added, reaching across to pat my hand. For a brief moment, I believed her sincerity. It wasn't until I helped her tidy the guest room that I noticed the dresser drawer partly open. You know, when something small catches your eye, not because it's out of place, but because it feels like it shouldn't be there at all. That's how it was. The corner of a golden envelope sticking out, reflecting light like a secret trying to stay hidden. I remember hesitating, glancing towards the kitchen where she was humming softly. My chest beat too hard, too fast. And then I pulled it open. The wedding invitation was thick, textured, probably expensive. Inside, names printed in deep maroon ink: Raghav Sharma and Kavya Menon. The date was next Saturday. The venue, a temple hall just an hour outside the city. A whole life scheduled neatly into gold letters. Read it twice. Then again. The more I looked, the more unreal it felt. Like reading about a stranger who happened to share his name. But the details, his father's initials, his mother's name, left no doubt. For a while, I stood frozen. I could have stormed into the kitchen. I could have demanded an explanation. But instead, instinct told me to stay still. There's a particular kind of quiet that comes when your heart breaks. It's not loud or chaotic. It's almost polite. I slid the card back, closed the drawer, and forced myself to breathe. I spent the walk home in a trance. The world around me lost its edges, shops, noise, people, all blurred. I kept hearing his voice, the one from the airport. "It's just a pause, okay?" The words replayed like a broken record until they lost meaning. At home, I opened his last message, a grainy photo of coffee on his tiny apartment balcony. Caption: "Morning here. Miss you already." I wanted to throw the phone away. Instead, I scrolled up old messages, jokes, our plans, the promise to visit in winter. It felt like reading a script written by someone who didn't exist anymore. That night I couldn't eat. The ceiling fan clicked with every turn, counting seconds like a metronome to my thoughts. Love is supposed to build you, not hollow you. Yet here I was, shrinking into something small and invisible. The next morning, I called his number. Switched off. I tried again that evening. Same response. I even emailed him, asking if he'd gotten my package, pretending everything was normal. No reply. Then, 3 days later, his mother called again, her tone casual. She said she was visiting her sister and would be out of town for a few days. The wedding's date flashed through my mind, but I said nothing. When I hung up, I realized what I had to do. I booked a flight. Attending his wedding wasn't about confrontation or closure, at least, that's what I told myself. I needed to witness the truth, to see it with my own eyes. To make sure this nightmare had a name and a face. I imagined him in a cream sherwani, smiling the way he used to when I brushed lint off his shoulder. I wanted to know what kind of man could look that way while standing beside someone else. The days leading up to the flight dragged like years. I didn't tell anyone. I went to work, I smiled when spoken to, but inside everything was unraveling. The kind of unraveling you can't stop because your hands are too tired from pretending. Then, the night before I left, I dreamed about him. In the dream, he was standing in the airport again, only this time, he didn't hold me. He walked past, suitcase rolling behind him, eyes fixed straight ahead. I called out his name, but no sound came. Just the echo of footsteps fading into the crowd. When I woke up, my pillow was damp, the flight was short, but every minute stretched. I stared out of the window, watching clouds form shapes I couldn't name. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. I thought about everything we'd shared, the small dinners, the anniversaries, the silly inside jokes about how I could never remember movie names. Was all of it just practice? Rehearsal for the life you wanted with someone else? I arrived at the town where the wedding was set to happen. It was a sleepy place, full of narrow lanes and bright marigolds strung across street corners. The temple stood high on the hill, white walls gleaming under the afternoon sun. Bells rang in the distance. Somewhere, someone was laughing. I took a room at a small lodge, just down the road. The air smelled of sandalwood and dust. I sat on the bed, staring at my suitcase. I'd packed one plain kurta, minimal makeup, nothing fancy. I didn't want to be seen. I wanted to become part of the background, one more face among the crowd. As night fell, I looked out at the glowing outline of the temple, the faint sound of drums echoing through the valley. Tomorrow, he would marry another woman. And I, his promise, his lie, would be standing somewhere out there, quietly watching the last pieces of us disappear. The morning of the wedding began quietly. I woke to the sound of temple bells, the kind that linger in the air long after they stop ringing. Through the window, I could see strings of marigolds swaying in the soft wind, women in bright saris carrying trays of flowers, the smell of incense rising through the narrow street. Everything looked like a painting, and I was the stray smudge on the edge of the canvas. I didn't dress like I was going to a wedding. A pale blue kurta, hair tied back, no jewelry. I didn't want to attract attention. I told myself I was just going to watch from afar, maybe from behind one of the temple columns. But my heart had other plans. It wouldn't stay still. It thudded against my ribs with every step I took toward the sound of drums. By the time I reached the temple gates, the ceremony was already underway. Guests filled the courtyard, laughter spilling out like sunlight. I stood at the periphery, my scarf pulled close around my face. The rhythmic chants echoed through the air, deep and ancient, threaded with the smell of jasmine and smoke. A group of children ran past, their laughter cutting through the solemnity, and then I saw him. Raghav stood in front of the main shrine, draped in a cream sherwani, maroon shawl over his shoulders. He looked calm. Not nervous, not hesitant. His posture was steady, his expression composed. Just a groom on his wedding day. My throat tightened. Beside him, she stood, a woman I'd never seen before. Kavya. Dressed in gold and red, her bangles clinking with every movement. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she looked peaceful. As if her world had always made sense, as if she'd never been told one story while another unfolded behind her back. I watched as he tied the sacred thread, his smile brief but real. The crowd clapped, petals rained, someone cheered. I wanted to hate him in that moment, to feel anger burn away the pain, but all I felt was emptiness. Like standing underwater, watching light distort, for a second, his gaze flickered across the crowd, just a sweep, a glance, and stumbled upon me. I saw recognition spark in his eyes. Just a moment, then gone. He looked away, faster than a blink, adjusting the garland around his shoulders as though I were a ghost his mind had conjured. Maybe that's what I was to him now, something he would later convince himself he imagined. I left before the final rituals ended. I didn't need to see him take her hand again. Outside, the sunlight felt cruelly bright. My eyes burned, not just with tears but with clarity. I'd come searching for truth, and I'd found it, plain and unbearable. I walked back to my lodge slowly, hearing echoes of the ceremony spilling down the hill. Every sound seemed louder, the bells, the cheer, the chirping birds. All singing of joy that did not belong to me. When I reached my room, I locked the door and sat by the window, watching the wind scatter petals across the path below. It felt poetic, in a way, beautiful things carried away by forces they couldn't resist. That evening, I decided I wasn't going home just yet. There were unanswered questions that kept clawing at me. His mother's face flashed before my eyes, the way she'd smiled when I came over. The way her voice didn't tremble once as she lied. Through kindness. I needed to understand why. Why all the pretending? Why all the warmth that now felt like deceit wrapped in lace? So the next morning, I went back to her house. She looked startled when she opened the door, though she masked it quickly. "Oh, Beta. You came back so soon?" Her smile was swift, uneasy. I nodded, stepping inside before she could gather her defense. The house was the same, a quiet, neat, with that same faint scent of rose talc. A photo of Rugov's family hung by the mantel. My eyes lingered on his face in that portrait, frozen halfway between boyhood and manhood. "Trusting, unspoiled, tea?" she asked quickly, already reaching for cups. "Sure," I said, sitting down. My voice felt foreign even to me, measured, flat. She brought the tray, set it down carefully. Her hands trembled just the faintest bit, the porcelain rattling. We didn't speak for a while. The ticking of the wall clock filled the silence. "I went to the wedding," I finally said. The clink of her spoon stopped. Her eyes flicked up, then down. "I see," she whispered. No shock, just resignation. As if she had been waiting for me to say it. "I suppose he didn't tell you," I continued. Her lip quivered. "He wanted to. But it was complicated." "Was it?" My voice cracked on that question. "Or was it simple, and you didn't think I deserved the truth?" She sighed, shoulders sagging. "It wasn't meant to go this way. Things changed after his father's health declined. His uncle's business in Chennai offered to take him in, but they set one condition." She hesitated. "He had to marry Kavya. Her father funded the firm's expansion." I blinked. The words were cold, transactional. "So he married her for convenience." She flinched. "For duty," she corrected softly. I laughed, a hollow sound. "Is that what you told yourself? That lying to me was duty? That breaking someone like that brought you peace?" Her eyes filled. "You're angry, and you have every right. But he tried, Beta. He tried to find a way out. His heart was torn, between what he owed and what he wanted. In the end, he chose what he thought was right for the family. Families. They always have a word ready to justify cruelty. Sacrifice, duty, honor." I stood up. Every muscle in my body felt heavy. "You know," I said quietly, "the day he left for Singapore, he made me promise we'd survive the distance. He cried in my arms. I thought it was love." I paused. Now I see it was guilt. Her tears came then, quiet, slow, without sound. But I didn't stay to comfort her. Some wounds need silence, not sympathy. Outside, the sky was folding into dusk. I walked toward the bus stop with no destination in mind. I only knew one thing: I wasn't returning to the same life. Because sometimes heartbreak doesn't destroy you. It unmasks you. It strips away illusions until all that remains is the bare truth, and truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. The following days blurred together. I had returned to the city, but the air felt different, quieter, heavier. There was a strange absence where his messages used to appear, a blank space that refused to stay empty. It's odd how silence can be louder than words, how it hums inside you until your thoughts start to echo with it. For a while, I went through motions. Work, meals, sleep that came only in restless fragments. Friends asked if I was all right, and I smiled the way people do when they're halfway to falling apart. I told them he was busy abroad. That was the lie I kept for their comfort, even when I couldn't forgive myself for believing his. One rainy evening, I found myself wandering into a bookstore near my old college. The place still smelled of dust and faint coffee, like time had collected in its corners. I stood there, staring at rows of stories, so many beginnings, endings, lessons. It struck me that life was like that. You think you're reading one kind of story, but it turns out you wandered into another without noticing the chapter break. On impulse, I bought a small notebook. Plain. Brown cover. That night, I began to write, not about him, not exactly. But about moments. The first time he laughed during a power cut. The way he used to tap his thumb when he was nervous. Each detail went down like testimony, evidence of a love that existed once. Maybe writing was my way of preserving sanity, maybe it was the only way to bury something without losing it completely. Weeks passed. Then came a message from an unknown number. Can we talk? It was him. The name I hadn't seen in so long now glowed on the screen, simple and familiar. My breath caught. A part of me wanted to delete it, to let silence have the final word. But another part, the foolish, tender part, needed to know what he could possibly have to say. We met at a cafe near the lake, one we used to visit on Sunday evenings. I arrived early, mostly to steel myself. The cafe hadn't changed. The waiter still recognized me, asked if I wanted our usual table. The familiarity stung. When Raghav walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. He looked thinner, older somehow. Guilt has a way of carving people out from the inside. He saw me and froze for a heartbeat before walking over. Hi, he said, his voice low. I nodded. Hi. We sat in silence for a moment, the rain outside pressing softly against the glass. Then he sighed. You found out. I did. I wanted to call you before the wedding, he said quietly. I wrote messages, drafted emails. I just couldn't press send. Everything happened too fast. No, I said. It didn't happen fast. It happened quietly, while I was still believing every word you said. He flinched as if the truth stung more than any insult could. He rubbed a hand over his face. You deserved better. I know that. I didn't want to hurt you. I thought I could fix things later, after lying. I interrupted. After marrying someone else? He looked up, eyes raw. It wasn't all a lie. That made me laugh, soft, humorless. That's the thing about lies, Raghav. They don't have to be all false. You mix just enough truth, and you call it love. He didn't argue. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was heavy, honest. There's a kind of honesty that arrives too late to matter. Finally, he said, I'm sorry. Truly. I did love you. And now? I asked. He hesitated. Now I'm trying to live with my choices. I nodded, staring at the streaks of rain on the window. That's what I'm doing too. We didn't talk much after that. When we said goodbye, there was no drama. No explosion of tears, no pleading. Just two people quietly standing on the ashes of what once felt endless. He walked away first, and I didn't look back this time. That night, I opened my notebook again. I wrote one final entry. I learned that love is not about who stays, it's about who tells the truth while they're still here. After that day, I stopped revisiting the past. Slowly, I began putting my energy into pieces of myself I'd forgotten. I started volunteering on weekends, painting again, visiting my grandmother's old friend who lived nearby. Life didn't transform overnight, but grief began to loosen its hold, little by little. Then, about 2 months later, fate delivered one last twist. Was at a child welfare center, helping organize adoption files for a charity drive. It wasn't unusual work, mostly paperwork and dusty archives. But as I sorted through old family records, one file caught my eye. It had Raghav's family name on it. Curiosity froze me for a second before I opened it. Inside were adoption papers. Dated 30 years ago. The name of the adopted child, Raghav Sharma. My hands went cold. The listed biological mother's name? Kavya Menon, the same as his bride. The world seemed to tilt. I reread it several times, sure I was misunderstanding. But there it was, plain, stamped, certified. Raghav had been adopted as an infant by the family he thought was his own. The woman he married, his new wife, was his biological mother's daughter from another marriage. Which made them connected in ways neither could have imagined unless somebody already knew. I took a deep breath and wrapped the paper shut, trying to steady myself. It wasn't my place to interfere, not anymore. But somewhere deep down, I felt the burn of another truth. His mother had known. Maybe that was why she'd been so insistent, why she pushed the marriage, trying to repair something that had been hidden too long. In her own twisted way, everything suddenly made sense. The secrecy, her forced calm, her strange tenderness toward me. She had been protecting her family's secret, not her son's heart. My chest tightened. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. Only sorrow. Families break people for reasons we may never understand, wrapping shame and duty together like threads that strangle love itself. Left the center early that day. As I walked out into the late afternoon sun, I realized the story was larger than me. My heartbreak had been just one note in a bigger, older symphony of lies, and somehow, that made it easier to let go. That evening, I sat by the window of my apartment, the city glowing faintly below, thinking about the discovery I had stumbled upon. It wasn't just another secret, it was the kind of truth that rewrites everything. Every gesture, every silence, every carefully chosen word from his mother suddenly rearranged themselves into a puzzle that, once completed, revealed something deeply tragic. Thought about calling him, but what would I say? That his new wife might be his sister? That his mother's lifelong secret had just resurfaced in a dusty government file? It wasn't my place anymore. Some truths, when revealed by the wrong voice, cause more ruin than silence ever could. So I sat there and watched the night deepen over the city. The flicker of streetlights blurred into soft halos. The hum of scooters faded into the rhythm of my heartbeat. I felt, for the first time in months, completely still, a fragile kind of peace that came not from understanding, but from acceptance. The next morning, I walked to the park near my building. It was early. Vendors were still setting up their carts, the smell of freshly cut grass still damp in the air. I sat on a bench, notebook in hand, and wrote one line. Sometimes, love is not a blessing or a curse, it's a teacher. I didn't realize I was crying until a little girl, holding her mother's hand, stopped and offered me a lollipop. "Don't be sad, Auntie," she said softly. Her innocence cut through the fog in my chest. I smiled, thanked her, and tucked the candy into my pocket. It was a small, silly thing, but somehow, it anchored me. Days turned into weeks. I didn't hear from Raghav again, and part of me hoped I never would. I turned my focus toward work, the volunteer center, and the warmth of a small circle of friends who didn't ask too many questions. Healing, I realized, wasn't a straight road. It was circular, some days soft and calm, others sharp and raw, looping back before moving forward again. One afternoon at the center, a social worker named Mira asked if I'd consider counseling a young woman who was struggling with rejection. At first, I hesitated, unsure if I had the right words to guide anyone else. But something in her tone nudged me. "You've survived things," Mira said gently. "Maybe what you've learned is not just for you." That evening, I met the girl. Her name was Isha. Barely 20, she sat across from me, eyes swollen from crying, her voice tight with disbelief as she spoke about a fiancé who had left her for someone better. Every sentence sounded like an echo of a chapter one had once written myself. I didn't give her advice that day. I just listened. And when she finished, I said quietly, "I believe you'll survive this. Not because it doesn't hurt, but because you'll grow around it." She didn't reply at first. But before leaving, she smiled through tears and said, "Thank you. You make it sound possible." It was in that moment that I realized something powerful. Pain that had once caged me could now build something beautiful for someone else. All those sleepless nights, those tears, those questions, they hadn't gone to waste. They had turned into understanding. Weeks later, I published a short essay online, anonymously at first. I titled it The Golden Card. It wasn't just about betrayal, it was about identity, truth, and the strange grace that sometimes follows heartbreak. It reached more people than I expected. Messages began to trickle in, women, men, strangers, from all across the country. Their stories wove through mine, secrets, second chances, lies, and survival. Each message reminded me of how connected we all were in our quiet sufferings. Then one evening, a letter arrived at my door. Handwritten. The handwriting was unmistakable. Raghav. I hesitated before opening it. He wrote that he had learned the truth, the real one. That during a family discussion weeks after the wedding, his mother had broken down and confessed everything. The adoption. The original connection between him and Kavya. The forced arrangement born from fear of exposure. He wrote that the marriage had been annulled quietly, that he would be moving abroad after all, this time for good. He ended the letter simply, "You were the only part of my life that was ever real. I wish I had known how to deserve you." I sat holding the pages for a long time. There was no satisfaction in reading it, only sorrow. Because love, twisted through deception, doesn't find redemption in regret. Yet, a part of me hoped he would find peace someday, not for him, but for the pieces of me that had once been his. I tore the letter into small strips and set them alight in a clay bowl on my balcony. The paper curled, blackened, and drifted into ash. The smoke rose gently, and I whispered a quiet goodbye, not to him, but to the version of myself who had waited for closure. That night, I dreamed of water again, the kind that moves slow and endless. Only this time, I wasn't drowning. I was floating. Months later, I visited my grandmother's old house. It was almost deserted, dust gathered thick on the windows. But standing there among the emptiness, I understood something she used to say when I was a child: truth is like monsoon rain. You can't stop it from coming. You can only decide what to grow after it's gone. I looked up at the sky as the first drops began to fall, and for once, I didn't hide from it. When you live through something that tries to break you, time doesn't heal it all at once, it rewires you slowly. I learned to live differently after that year. I learned to value silence, to understand that not every unanswered question deserves a response. Began teaching art classes for children at a community center. It started as a temporary favor, but before long it became something more. Kids have a way of painting without fear, of mixing colors carelessly until something beautiful appears. Watching them work softened something inside me. Their laughter replaced the background hum of sorrow that had lived in my chest for months. They reminded me what honesty looked like before the world teaches us to hide. One afternoon, while I was helping a little boy paint waves, he asked me, "Auntie, why do people lie?" His eyes were so innocent it almost hurt to answer. I thought of Raghav, his mother, and that golden card I'd once held in shaking hands. "Sometimes," I said, "people lie because they think the truth will hurt more." "And does it?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "No," I said. "The truth just heals slower." He nodded, as if that made perfect sense to him. It took me a long time to believe my own words. That evening, as the children dashed out to their parents, I sat on the classroom floor, surrounded by scraps of paper and splashes of color. I realized that heartbreak had given me something unexpected: perspective. Pain sharpens sight. It reveals the quiet patterns nobody notices when life feels easy. Raghav and I never spoke again. He kept his promise of disappearing abroad. Occasionally, I'd hear from someone who mentioned his name, a friend of a friend, passing gossip, but it no longer hurt. It was like hearing about a distant star that once burned bright and now simply existed somewhere far away, beyond reach. His mother, on the other hand, reached out once, about a year later. She sent a small parcel, a box of sweets wrapped with an old-fashioned note. It said only, "For your kindness when I didn't deserve it." I didn't reply, but I ate one piece of the sweet, just one. It tasted like closure, crumbly, bittersweet. Life went on. I finished my certification in art therapy, continued volunteering, and eventually started a small workshop series about healing through creative expression. People came from all walks of life: widows, estranged daughters, broken lovers. We painted quietly, shared tea, sometimes tears. And I would tell them, gently, "Don't rush your healing. It listens only to patience." Sometimes, I included parts of my story, not the names, not the golden invitation, but the lesson it carried. About how love isn't proof of goodness, and betrayal isn't the end of hope. We heal by choosing to believe in light again, even when the sky still holds thunder. 2 years later, something unexpected happened. I found myself falling in love again. It wasn't planned, it wasn't grand. It grew the way dawn creeps in, quiet, slow, soft enough that I didn't fear it. His name was Arjun. He was a literature professor who volunteered at the same center. He noticed details, how I double-checked brushes after class, how I hummed while cleaning. One day, he asked if I ever painted for myself anymore. No, I said, smiling faintly. I paint so others remember they still can. He nodded thoughtfully, as though he understood more than I had said. Somehow, he never asked about my past, and I never felt the need to explain. There was freedom in that. Love came back to me, not like a promise, but like an offering. Gentle. Quiet, kind. One evening, months into knowing him, we sat watching children light diyas by the river. He said something that stayed with me. We spend our lives chasing what was lost, but maybe the point isn't to get it back. Maybe it's to live differently now that we know how easily it can vanish. And that's what I did. I began to live differently. I traveled, laughed louder, held fewer grudges. I even started painting again, small canvases of ordinary things, trains at dusk, women hanging laundry, a child clutching a balloon. Moments that reminded me how beautiful ordinary truth is. Once, while sorting through old folders, I found that brown notebook, the one I'd started writing in after Raghav left. The pages had aged, the ink faded at the edges. But on the last page, I'd scrawled something simple: forgiveness is not saying what happened was fine. It's saying what happened will not define the rest of my story. I closed the notebook gently and smiled. For the first time, I knew it was true. Later that night, I stood on my balcony again, like I had years ago when I burned his letter. The city lights glimmered below, and somewhere in the distance, a train whistled. I thought about everything that had happened: the lies, the heartbreak, the discovery, the slow rebuilding. Once, it was a story written in pain. Now, it was simply history, a chapter one had finished reading. You don't forget something like that. You just carry it differently. Softer. Smaller. Like a scar that used to ache in the rain but doesn't anymore. The strange mercy of time, it dulls even the sharpest edges until what once cut us becomes something we can trace without bleeding. When I look back now, it still amazes me how easily life can turn itself inside out. How one golden card, hidden in a drawer, could unravel the world I thought I understood. For the longest time, I believed that what happened to me was a punishment for trusting too much. But now I know, it was simply truth arriving late. Raghav wasn't my forever, and maybe he wasn't meant to be. Sometimes people come into our lives to teach us lessons no book ever could. He taught me that love without honesty is only a performance, and that silence can be as cruel as betrayal. His mother taught me that even the people who hurt us most are often broken in their own ways. I learned to stop wearing pain as proof of love, and somewhere in the middle of all that sadness, I found something softer: healing. It didn't arrive suddenly. It didn't shine. It crept in quietly, with morning tea and children's laughter, with art and long walks and peace I didn't have to earn. That's how joy returns, small and shy, but certain. When people ask me now how I moved on, I tell them this: you don't move on, you move differently. You learn to walk through new days without expecting the old ones to return. You stop asking why. You start asking, what now? So here I am, telling my story not out of bitterness, but as a reminder, to whoever is listening from the other side of heartbreak, that endings are not the opposite of beginnings. They are part of them. Maybe you've been where I was, standing in someone's doorway, holding proof that love wasn't what you thought. Maybe your heart feels too tired to believe in beginnings again. But listen to me, one day you'll wake up and the air will feel lighter. The world will look ordinary again. And that ordinariness will feel like peace. You will eat something you love, laugh without noticing, hum while doing the dishes. That's how healing sneaks back in, disguised as everyday life. Tell me, have you ever found a truth that broke you, only to realize later it was showing you the way back to yourself? Would you have done what I did? If this story touched you, and you find echoes of your own truth in it, please consider subscribing to hear more stories like mine, real, raw, and full of the messy beauty of life. Sharing your thoughts helps us all feel less alone in our struggles, so don't be shy. Tell me in the comments how you survived a broken promise, or if you ever found strength in the secrets you uncovered, you know someone who might need to hear this story today, please share it with them. Because sometimes, the greatest healing begins with simply feeling understood. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the hardest truths lead us to the softest growth.